Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Congregation of Westchester and our online worship service. My name is Chris Hyson and I'm a lay leader in this congregation. Our minister, Reverend Dan Schatz, is off this week, and we are pleased to welcome Reverend Dr. Qiyamah Rahman this morning.
Good morning. Our opening words come from the life text of Keisha Thomas, an 18-year-old African-American resident in Ann Arbor, Michigan. She was one of a group of locals who gathered to protest a Ku Klux Klan rally in 1996. The protest took place in a designated area cordoned off by a fence. But when a fellow protester shouted into a megaphone that there was a Klansman in the crowd, a moment of chaos ensued. The man who was wearing a Confederate t-shirt and had an SS tattoo tried to run away. Protesters immediately seized him, knocking him to the ground, and began to beat him. In a now famous moment captured on film by photographer Mark Bruner, 18-year-old Keisha Thomas jumped between the protesters and the Klansmen, shielding him from their blows in spite of his racist regalia. The image went viral, becoming one of Life magazine's photographs of the year, and young Keisha Thomas became a sought-after voice advocating tolerance amidst hatred. It had been just 5 years since another king, Rodney King, uttered the now famous words, "Can we all just get along?" We all possess the spirit of Dr. King, but the spirit of compassion, the silent hero and shero that we sometimes strive for to do the right thing, does not always surface. On this day, dedicated to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we recognize the spirit of courage and conviction that live in each of us. The question becomes whether we choose to act on the courage of our convictions. 18-year-old Keisha Thomas did that day. Amen and blessed be.
Hello again, and thank you, Reverend Qiyamah. Reverend Qiyamah is a UU minister who resides in St. Croix, Virgin Islands, where she served the UU Fellowship of St. Croix from 2012 to 2018. Besides her passions as a minister and writer, she's a social worker, researcher, and community activist focused on social justice. Reverend Qiyamah earned her bachelor's in education and master's of social work from the University of Michigan. She has a master's of divinity from Meadville Lombard Theological School and a doctorate from Clark Atlanta University in Africana Women's Studies. Inspired by the interfaith and social justice witness of UUism, Reverend Qiyamah devotes her research to the richly diverse narratives of UU Black women and girls. With a doctorate in Africana Women's Studies, she has conducted research on violence against women in Ghana, South Africa, and the United States. Reverend Dr. Rahman challenges us to expand our scholarship on the presence of Black and Indigenous people of color UUs. She was the Men's Lecturer for 2020 and presented 3 lectures on Black UU women and Black UU clergy women. She is currently working on an anthology of Black Unitarian Universalist clergy women to be published by Skinner House Books. And she has just received a grant from the UU Women's Federation to create a website devoted to Black UU women and girls featuring research, interviews, news, and resources. So stay tuned. I especially want to welcome any visitors to our online service this morning. We hope we'll have a chance to get to know you. You can say hello in the comments. You can go to ucwc.org or send an email to welcome@ucwc.org if you'd like more information about the congregation. We hope also that you'll join us after the service for an online social hour. Reverend Qiyamah will be joining us for a few minutes after the service as well. The link and passwords to that social hour are in connections, and we'll put them in the comments for the service and on the screen at the end of the service. Unitarian Universalism holds the great good comes from wide diversity. So whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your heritage, and from wherever your beliefs spring, we are pleased that you are here. Let us walk a while together. We do have a few announcements today. Our Director of Lifespan Faith Development, Cassie Lengel, reminds us that tomorrow is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, in case you weren't aware. And even though we cannot be together for an in-person day of service, you can still do service for your community. The RE Committee is fighting food insecurity with a collection drive to benefit the Baby Food Fund. If you would like to donate, you can bring baby food items to the congregation to our physical church. Today, between 1 and 3 o'clock, there's a collection bin at the front door of the church. Or if you'd like to order food online, the charity's Amazon link is in connections for 100% contactless participation. As a reminder, please also check connections in our online calendar for more announcements and information on how to access our various online events and activities. Our chalice lighting words today are from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A man-made code that is inharmonious with the moral law is an unjust law. And an unjust law, as St. Augustine said, is no law at all. If you would now care to join in at home, we'll do our first hymn, This Little Light of Mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, yeah, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Please join in now at home as we say our unison affirmation. We gather, aspiring to be a thriving, caring, and welcoming community that supports each person's spiritual journey, embraces diversity, challenges us to live responsibly, and is a catalyst for a just and compassionate world. I would now like to turn things over to Cassie Lengel with our Time for All Ages.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Now is the time in our service when we invite our children and youth to join those who have gathered here together as we listen to a very special Time for All Ages message. In today's service, we are remembering the life, work, and death of Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King was an American Baptist minister and activist who was a prominent leader in the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and he is remembered for his nonviolent methods as he led marches, sit-ins, boycotts, wrote books, and gave speeches and more. Dr. King even won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for his efforts, and he was assassinated in 1968. What many people remember most about MLK is his famous speech. "I have a dream," he said, "that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." He went on, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." We often hold up these quotes as the epitome of Dr. King's message, a vision of hope for the future, and it can be tempting to forget the passion and learning and work and fighting that we have to do to make this future happen. Dr. King's speech began with the demand that the Black community receive what America promised her people: the freedoms of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to remind all those fighting injustice of the fierce urgency of now, to act and to make change. Then, before he left the stage, Dr. King grabbed a hold of the podium and spoke with passion from the heart, saying, "I have a dream about what the world could look like," as a call to action. Dr. King's speech gives us so much hope for a better tomorrow, a dream of what we can create if we do the work, fight the injustice, and build this world step by hard step. Martin Luther King Jr. was a revolutionary who used his creativity to imagine a world that was better, full of equity and inclusion and diversity, built by people of all colors and walks of life. We too must walk in his footsteps. We must go out into the world fighting for the worth and dignity and inclusion of our neighbors. We too must invest ourselves by imagining what life could and will be like in the future. We can imagine a better future into existence together. What if 2020, with its pandemic and marches and struggles, was the spark for change? What if we continue to work on our own selves to recognize privilege? What if the words Black Lives Matter changed our cities? What if we listened to the imagination of our Black, Indigenous, and neighbors of color and followed their leadership into a new world? When we let ourselves imagine all the wonderful what ifs, we just might be able to move from where we've been, our fears and our struggles, to where we want to go and who we want to be together. Let's get to work.
Thank you, Cassie. We are very grateful for all the gifts that our members and friends continue to offer to our congregation. While we are online, you can donate via the web, or by text, or by app, or by mailing in a good old-fashioned check. Or if you're sending in a pledge, you can add something to the pledge you pay for each month. Each month on the third Sunday, we share our offering with an organization or cause in the community. This month, we are sharing with the Maternal and Child Health Consortium. Here to tell us a little more about the Maternal and Child Health Consortium is Alma Vidal.
Good morning. Thank you so much for opportunity It is a pleasure to be able to share a little bit about our Healthy Start program. This is a home visiting program for pregnant women and children under 18 months old. And what we do during this program is we provide home visiting services and emotional and social support during and after birth. And we also provide parenting education and diabetes prevention education. As we all know, during COVID, everything has changed. So we continue to provide support for families remotely. So we continue calling them or providing the visits in video chat like we're doing right now. But we are still helping participants. I want to share just a quick story with you just to give you a little more like a bigger idea of what we do. So we had a participant calling us a couple of days ago, weeks ago. She mentioned that she didn't have heat in her home and it was very cold. And she has an 8-month baby and a 7 years old little girl. So there was no heat at home. She is struggling because her husband is not working a lot of hours just due to the pandemic. They're struggling and they had to decide whether they were paying the electric or if they were paying for food. So of course, food was the first answer. So she reached out to me and she was, of course, very desperate. She didn't know what to do. And I was able to communicate with other organizations that helped provide assistance with electric and all of that help. And she was able to get financial assistance to fill up her tank to get heat at home. And I was also able to provide diapers for the baby, blankets, because I know that it wasn't going to be immediately that she was going to receive the assistance. So she needed at least something to cover the babies with. Gift cards for food. And then after that, we also provided help with applying for food stamps and LIHEAP, which was gonna help her with her monthly situation that she was struggling with. So this is just a little bit of what MCHC does. She was very thankful for all the help and of course her emotional stress, like it kind of helped a little bit with that. And we still provide home visits for that family. So this is what we do. Thank you so much again for giving me the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Alma. As we give today, I hope we will be as generous as we can within our means. We will now receive the morning offering. For these gifts and for all we give to our many communities, we are truly grateful. Please now join in at home for our next hymn, Guide My Feet.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain.
It is my pleasure again to welcome Reverend Dr. Qiyamah Rahman. Reverend Qiyamah.
This morning, I begin at the end of Dr. King's life, reflecting on his journey. In his last speech delivered on April 3rd, 1968, at the Mason Temple Church of God in Christ, their headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee, he called for unity, economic actions, boycotts, and nonviolent protests. He was speaking to the Memphis sanitation workers about their proposed strike. In his now famous speech titled, "I've Been to the Mountaintop," he stated, quote, "The issue is injustice. The issue is the refusal of Memphis to be fair and honest in its dealings with its public servants who happen to be sanitation workers." He was assassinated the next day. Let's revisit that speech to see what was on his heart and his mind. He said, quote, "Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Flashback to December 1st, 1955. It was the bravery of a woman, Rosa Parks, that forever changed Dr. King's life and catapulted him onto the national and international arena. You see, he first came to our attention with the Montgomery bus boycott as a result of her refusal to relinquish her seat. Others joined in the boycott that lasted for a year. Eventually, bus segregation was ruled unconstitutional, and hence a major civil rights victory was won. We know that Dr. King was known for his impassioned speeches and articulate sermons in which he spoke out against the injustices of racism, segregation, and white supremacy. In the spring of 1968, he began to also denounce materialism and militarization. In the last few years of his life, Dr. King had fallen out of favor with many because he dared speak out against the war in Vietnam and the economic disparities in our country, and more specifically, the wealth gap between people of color and whites. Dr. King stated the following, quote, "Call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all of God's children," unquote. He had already earned his reputation as a great civil rights leader, and yet some dared to try to stifle the dream and the dreamer by ostracizing him. During his lifetime, he espoused a social gospel, a liberation theology that emphasized justice for the poor and oppressed, that would ultimately engender the beloved community, the kingdom of God on earth, as he referred to it. Dr. King challenged our nation's moral authority and memory. He challenged America to make good on its promises of justice and freedom for all people. King's legacy created a new narrative, one that was interfaith as well as culturally and racially diverse, a narrative that we are still attempting to make good on in this country. I believe it requires courage to follow in Dr. King's footsteps. Courage is not merely the absence of fear, but the courage of conviction, the courage to hold a steady course, the courage to ask for help, and the courage to risk failure. Courage means that you will sometimes find yourself in the valley of despair. I recall a moment of despair for Dr. King. Like many of us, he struggled at times with his vision, his leadership, his faith, and commitment. In a prayer titled King's Prayer, Dr. King is not portrayed as the great fearless leader that we all knew and loved. Instead, he was like so many of us when we become discouraged and afraid. He wrote, quote, "I had reached the saturation point. I am here taking a stand for what I believe is right. But now I am afraid. The people are looking to me for leadership, and I stand before them without strength and courage. They too will falter. I am at the end of my powers. I have nothing left. I can't face it alone." At that moment, he wrote, "I experienced the presence of the divine as I had never before experienced him. It seemed as though I could hear the quiet assurance of an inner voice saying, 'Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for truth. God will be at your side forever.' Almost at once, my fears began to pass from me. My uncertainty disappeared. I was ready to face anything. The outer circumstances remained the same, but God had given me inner calm," unquote. Life is about moments of grace like these, when we appear to have reached the end of our resources, that we have to reach deep inside for the journey at hand. That is why our faith development as Unitarian Universalists is so important. That is why community is critical. How different would this story have been if King had reached inside and found nothing in his moment of despair? What do you call on when you get through life's adversities, and ultimately to beloved community, to the promised land, if you were charged with the crime of being Unitarian Universalist, would there be enough evidence to convict you? For King, it was his Christian redemption delivered by a God of love and compassion that held him when he could not go on. For us as Unitarian Universalists embracing diverse beliefs, I challenge each of you to identify the various ways that your ideology and theology holds you during times of great distress, times like these. Some of you remember King's visit to Chicago on August 5th, 1966, described as follows. As King marched, someone hurled a stone. It struck King on the head. Stunned, he fell to his knee. He stayed on the ground for several seconds. As he rose, aides and bodyguards surrounded him to protect him from rocks, bottles, and firecrackers that rained down on the demonstrators. King was one of 30 people who were injured. The disturbance resulted in 40 arrests. He later explained why he put himself at risk. Quote, "I have to do this to expose myself, to bring this hate into the open. I have seen many demonstrations in the South, but I have never seen anything so hostile and so hateful as I've seen here today," unquote. King said there would be some difficult days ahead. January 6, 2021 was a difficult day. It was a day that some of us were afraid, and like King, we had to reach deep inside to know that we could not despair and give in to those that would trample on the democratic process that has become so fragile in these times. Dr. King embodied a spirit of generosity, an open and optimistic view of life and creation. He conveyed a profound respect for those with different views. He met violence with gentleness, forgiveness, and understanding because he understood grace, redemption, and love were the answers. Exactly 1 year before his assassination in Memphis, Tennessee, King stood in the chancel of Riverside Church in New York City. There he explained how he had come to connect the struggle for civil rights with the fight for economic justice and the early protests against the Vietnam War. He stated, quote, "Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor in America who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and death and corruption in Vietnam," unquote. Getting to beloved community requires that we set our feet on the path of justice and equality, that we be visionaries willing to be in relationship with one another and be intentional about naming our theologies and ideologies to tap our inner resources and spiritual practices that get us through adversity. Which king are we celebrating? The king that was demonized because of his opposition to the Vietnam War? The king that criticized the militarization of America? The king that was sometimes discouraged and afraid? The king that believed in nonviolence in the face of violence? The king that was a flawed human being and rumors of womanizing spurred by the FBI spurred by those who sought to bring him down. I believe in order to be true to his legacy, we must celebrate all aspects of his memory. We turn now to Dr. King's acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway, December 10th, 1964. He stated, "Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I accept the Nobel Prize for Peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States of America are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice. I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice. I am mindful that only yesterday in Birmingham, Alabama, our children crying out for brotherhood were answered with fire hoses, snarling dogs, and even death. I am mindful that only yesterday in Philadelphia, Mississippi, young people seeking to secure the right to vote were brutalized and murdered. And only yesterday, more than 40 houses of worship in the state of Mississippi alone were bombed or burned because they offered a sanctuary to those who would not accept segregation. I am mindful that debilitating and grinding poverty affects my people and changes them to the lowest rungs of the economic ladder. Therefore, I must ask why this prize is awarded to a movement which is beleaguered and committed to unrelenting struggle, to a movement which has not won the very peace and brotherhood which is the essence of the Nobel Prize. After contemplation, I conclude that this award, which I receive on behalf of that movement, is a profound recognition that nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral question of our time. The need for man to overcome and influence and make a difference in the oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Civilization and violence are antithetical concepts. I accept this award today with an abiding faith in America and an audacious faith in the future of humankind. I refuse to accept despair as the final response to the ambiguities of history. He goes on to say, I refuse to accept the cynical notion that nation after nation must spiral down a militaristic stairway into the hell of thermonuclear destruction. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right temporarily defeated is stronger than evil triumphant. And the lion and the lamb shall lie down together, and every man shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid. I still believe that we shall overcome. Those were excerpts from his speech in Oslo, Norway. We come now to another speech given to the American Psychology Association's annual convention in September of 1967. He delivered that speech in Washington, D.C. Note the change and shift in some of his thinking and ideas. He says, quote, urban riots must now be recognized as durable social phenomena. They may be deplored, but they are there and should be understood. Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections. The rioters are not seeking to seize territory or to attain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. They are a distorted form of social protest. The looting, which is their principal feature, serves many functions. It enables the most enraged and deprived Negro to take hold of consumer goods with the ease the white man does by using his purse. Often the Negro does not even want what he takes. He wants the experience of taking, unquote, unquote. King closed that speech with a stark truth. He says, quote, "Let us say boldly that if the violations of law by the white man in the slums over the years were calculated and compared with the law breaking of a few days of riots, the hardened criminal would be the white man. These are often difficult things to say, but I have come to see more and more that it is necessary to utter the truth in order to deal with the great problems that we face in our society," unquote. Which king are we celebrating? Journalist Hanif Abdur-Rahim writes the following: Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the end of his life was coming to understand the restrictions of nonviolence as a weapon against a violent oppressor who shows no moral compass. There are limits to how long one can attempt to quiet a fire. King's transition from the summer of 1966 to the summer of 1967 was from hoping against violence to accepting it as a function of the society it operated in as an inevitability. For a people he had led to a promised land that did not deliver on its promise. Abdur-Rahim states, "The real tragedy of King's legacy is that the white people who so frequently invoke it in the name of peace do so with a fundamental perversion of his message. Nonviolence, as it is discussed and fetishized in proximity to the poor and or marginalized, is so often only dragged out in response to any uprising of those people. The riot is a language, yes, but the response to a riot is also its own language, a language of doublespeak. The call is for peace and love, but the true demand is for complete silence altogether. An NFL player takes a knee without speaking and is threatened and hated, called a violent thug and a racist. For those of certain skin colors, no protest can be peaceful enough. And it's funny how that works. The people who have the most justifiable anger, the most rightful case for rebellion, are the ones most frequently told to settle down, to embrace nonviolence. They are the ones told to follow the example of a man who met his end with a bullet fired from a racist gun," unquote. In Dr. King's words, "We've got some difficult days ahead." Which king will we celebrate? May it be so. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be. And so it is.
Thank you, Reverend Qiyamah. As we move now into the time of the service where we lift up without names, joys and sorrows, I invite you to sing wherever you are. There is a love holding me.
There is a love holding me. There is a love holding all that I love. There is a love holding me. I rest in this love.
Good morning. My name is Pam Sears. I'm a member of the pastoral care team and the contact person for the month of January. We have no cards of sharing this morning. However, as always, a candle has been lit for those joys, sorrows, and concerns that remain unspoken.
please sing There Is a Love Holding Us.
There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding us. We rest in this love.
And now please join in for our final hymn, One More Step.
One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us and everyone. We'll take one more step. One more word, we will say one more word, till every word is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word. One more prayer, we will say one more prayer, till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer. One more song, we will sing one more song, till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song. One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us and everyone. We'll take one more step.
The Reverend Clinton Lee Scott, a Unitarian Universalist minister, asserts that, quote, always it is easier to pay homage to prophets than to heed the direction of their vision, unquote. In closing, I could quote any number of Dr. King's prolific words and speeches. Instead, I choose to quote a lesser known statement made to the United States Congress on May 20th, 1959. Dr. King simply said to them, quote, make a career of humanity, commit yourself to the noble struggle for equal rights. You will make a greater person of yourself, greater nation of your country, and a finer world to live in, unquote. This was Dr. King's legacy. He reminded us in his eloquent words and by his example what we are capable of being in our finest, highest, and best selves. Salvation, says Dr. King, is being on the right road, not having reached a destination. May we discern the right road for ourselves and lift up the good within us and around us and be a light unto the world. May it be so. Ashe, amen, and blessed be.